Unfortunately, one of the biggest epidemics and crises that our world is facing revolves around global warming and its dramatic and catastrophic effects on the environment, many of which include the effect on the polar ice caps and oceans and the animals in areas such as the Arctic and Antarctica. Recently, in an Arctic resilience report, it was found that the effects of Arctic warming could be felt from distances such as the Indian Ocean, meaning there could be uncontrolled changes of climate change at a complete global level. Temperatures in the Arctic are currently about 20 degrees Celsius above what should be expected for the time of the year, described as accelerating off the charts of the expected. At this moment, sea ice is at the lowest extent ever recorded for this time of the year. What previously were sent as warnings are now occurring in real life. The major issue of why the polar ice caps and oceans are melting and sea levels are rising are because of the rapid climate change and tipping points. Climate tipping points take place when a natural system like the polar ice cap is put through sudden and overwhelming change, which has a profound effect on the surrounding ecosystems, which proved to be irreversible. In a past report of 2016 written by the National Snow and Ice Data Center, the tipping points of the climate change have been identified, which include the growth in vegetation and tundra. This replaces reflective snow and ice with darker vegetation, allowing it to absorb and take in more heat, which leads to the release of methane, which is a potent greenhouse gas. This comes from the tundra as the warmth grows. This causes shifts in snow distribution, which warm the ocean and result in altered climate patterns, which are the ones currently being seen from distances as far away as Asia. The monsoon, if affected, leads to the collapse of some key Arctic fisheries, with known-on effects on all ocean ecosystems around the universe. With the climate change topic, the polar ice cap and sea levels rising, oceans suffering, it is at this moment in which action is severely and desperately needed. Yet somehow, instead, the world is neglecting these issues and brushing them off. Donald Trump has unveiled his plans of removing the budget for climate change science, which is currently used by NASA and other U.S. federal agencies for projects and research that examine the Arctic changes and address the issues, how they can be fixed, and such. However, now has diverted into spending it on space exploration. Thus, it has become more and more urgent for a solution and limitations on global warming's cruel impacts. Climate change, the issue that has yet to be solved and addressed as it should. Our Earth's temperature has already risen by 1.8 degrees Fahrenheit since the Industrial Revolution of 1750. It is said that by 2030, the rise of temperature will reach by 2.7 degrees, according to a recent report released by the UN's Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC. The hope is to avoid the rise by 2.7 degrees at all costs. Once it is crossed, our Earth becomes an uninhabitable hellscape, a disaster to live in. However, it requires sustained efforts and action to make sure we stay under the pathway of 1.5 degrees Celsius, or to reach below it once the line is crossed. It would take efforts of reducing net emissions rapidly and immensely from now, and sustaining that throughout the whole century. Gavin Schmidt, a climate scientist and director of the NASA Goddard Institute for Space Studies, told the New York Post, "There must be serious action taken to stabilize the degrees. If degrees are stabilized to 1.5, 2, or 3 degrees Celsius, it could be fixed. However, the higher the degrees goes, the warmer it gets and the more the sea levels rises. Fires rage, the storms intensify, and the Arctic Sea continues to melt and fall apart, and so much more could happen, all of which are extremely sensitive to the climate change, and that would only continue to worsen if no serious action on net emissions is taken. It is estimated that by the end of the century, in a country like the US, the degrees can vary from 1.6 degrees to 6.6 degrees Celsius hotter if they continue emitting these greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. However, yet no action has been taken. Places such as the Arctic and Antarctica and their collapsing polar ice caps continue to suffer. It was found that in Antarctica they have lost a total of 3 trillion ice since 1992, only, as well as according to a landmark study published suggesting that the frozen continent could possibly reiterate Earth's coastlines if the climate change and global warming continue at the rate it currently is at. Only in the past 5 years, 2/5 of the ice that Antarctica has lost took place, leaving the remaining 3/5 going back from 2013 to 1992. The immense comparison can obviously be seen. Moreover, as well as a threefold increase in the pace of which Antarctica is shredding its ice, and a consortium of 84 scientists gathered to identify this and report it in the journal Nature. Additionally, they also highlight and note the existential crisis and threat facing low-lying coastal cities, communities of which are home to hundreds of millions of people, and the risk of being left homeless and dead. We now have an unequivocal picture of what's happening in Antarctica, said the co-lead author Eric Rubnett, a scientist at NASA's Jet Population Laboratory who has been tracking Earth's ice sheets for 2 decades. We view these results as another ringing alarm for action to slow the warming of our planet. Furthermore, scientists have been struggling in editing whether or not Antarctica has accumulated more mass through annual snowfall than it has losing meltwater runoff and ice flows into the ocean. However, finally, after 2 decades of satellite data, the new findings, which draw from 24 separate space-related surveys, have gathered a full, understandable picture. This is that the general study had showed that net gain in mass over recent decades. The area most affected by the global warming is West Antarctica, especially the Antarctic Peninsula, where there are more than 6,500 square kilometers of ice melting and shelving off into the ocean since only 1995. Ice shelves melting into the ocean do not add to sea level, but the glaciers on West Antarctica hold enough water to push the ocean levels up by 35 meters. The main 2 glaciers, Pine Island and Thwaites, have rapidly accelerated and are extremely unstable now. They act as the core holding back the ice mass further inland from falling into oceans. Nearly all the ice that has shelved into the oceans has come from West Antarctica. Antarctica is blanketed and covered by an abundant amount of icepack that could lift global oceans by nearly 60 meters, which covers twice the area of the continental United States. Fortunately, the 90% of frozen water that sits atop East Antarctica has been able to remain mostly stable so far, even with the horrendous impacts of the climate change, and it's driven up Earth's average surface by a full degree, meaning there is still hope for that area. Animals. A huge issue revolves around animal survival in these areas affected by the climate change. First, the ocean accounts for more than half of the surface area of the Arctic. Many species and organisms rely on the sea's biological productivity and sea ice presence, which we know is now in danger. Animals like polar bears hunt on sea ice, and it's essential for them to be able to transport from one region to another. The survival of mothers and cubs in the spring is widely dependent on the mother's hunting success, which is dependent on the stability and strength of the sea ice. This means that the less winter sea ice there is, the more it shelves into the ocean. The female polar bears are forced to go long periods of time without food. This affects the food chain, the ecosystem, their reproductive success, and the well-being of the animal overall. It also could threaten the survival of the polar bears as a whole species and endanger them, because they are forced to adapt a land-based summer lifestyle which is out of their nature and familiarity and causes many risks. They would be in risk from their predators and possible crossbreeding with brown or grizzly bears, as well as interactions with humans. Another animal that would be deeply affected by would be the sea breeze. Certain seabirds like ivory gulls and little auks would be negatively impacted by the extreme decline in sea ice. The ice acts like a means of easy travel and protection for the ivory gulls, and what they do is travel and nest on rocky cliffs and fly out to the sea to fish through cracks in the ice, and they scavenge on the top of the ice sea. Thus, with the sea ice declining, it poses a threat to their coast-lining nesting sites and their way of life. It has been seen that the animal is already endangered, and in a country like Canada, the number of ivory gulls has already dropped by 90% over the last 20 years, therefore proving the importance of the sea ice and how, if they continue to be endangered the way they are, this poses threats to many different factors around the world.